Hey, turn that thing up.
We're going to be talking about creativity today. We've got two great guests, co-writers from the streaming series The Chosen. It's a 7-season series about the life of Jesus, a historical drama that's become very popular all around the world, especially through the pandemic. It's been watched by something like 100 million people around the world. It's being translated into multiple languages. So we have Tyler Thompson and Ryan Swanson here with us, are two of the writers, together with the creator Dallas Jenkins. I've written all the episodes together, and so we're just really thrilled that you can be here with us, Ryan and Tyler.
Thanks for having us.
So Ryan and Tyler, I wanted to ask you, start with some questions asking you about art history of all things. There's so many Jesus narratives out there. We can go into a museum and see paintings from the medieval times. There's musicals, there's operas, there's all these things, all these ways of telling the story of Jesus that are floating around in our culture. So I'm just wondering if you were conscious of this whole heritage and if you're alluding back to some of these other portrayals, or if you were trying to start with sort of a blank slate and create your own new thing.
Some of those images just kind of live in our subconscious. Yeah. But we definitely don't have like a mood board of, medieval paintings of, say, the resurrection of Lazarus or the Sermon on the Mount. We've all seen those images, and so they're swimming around somewhere in our creative, soup. We also don't, you mentioned, do you strictly think of 21st century audiences? We don't think of the audience. We only think of the material.
Okay.
And we think of the audience insofar as we want to make it entertaining, and we're here to make prestige television. That's our only job. And so, pulling these stories off the page, putting them onto the screen, infusing them with life and relatability, yes, for our time. I mean, we are men of our time. We live in this world, and so we're going to relate to certain things. Or there's kind of anachronistic, potentially humor in the show, and We're not afraid of that because, by all accounts, any English translation of a Greek and Aramaic and Hebrew Bible is in some ways going to be inflected with changes and things like that. So we're not worried about something like that. But no, I don't know about you, but I don't often. Occasionally, I feel like I have looked at ancient art, maybe for like the Mary of Bethany and the oil. Like I remember reading that and thinking like the mechanics of this are confusing to me. Like how is she exactly like drying his feet with her hair, and like what position we sort of have to get in to do that, So I remember sort of consulting some paintings for that, but mostly, we're just kind of using our own imagination.
And half the times the paintings are just some artist's imagination of what happened here, right?
Yeah.
They didn't have a historical consultant to help them out either, right? So. Another thing I want to ask you about is coming up with backstories and details that are not in the gospel narrative. When I went to university, I studied a Canadian writer. His name is Michael Ondaatje, and one of the things he is famous for is he likes to write fiction about historical characters where there's not a lot of details available about the characters, so there's lots of gaps. And his comment oftentimes was, that's where I, as the creative artist, that's where my space is where all the gaps are. And so I wondered how you think about that in terms of working with you have the raw materials of the Gospels as your bedrock, but so much of what you're doing is filling in the gaps and using your creative imagination, right? To imagine where those gaps are. Is that kind of how you envision what you're doing a little bit?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a built into the proof of concept shepherd was this high concept notion that Dallas and Tyler brought, that they could tell the stories that are in the Bible and keep them absolutely behind an electrified fence. Like there was no alteration or no co-opting of those stories for dramatic purposes whatsoever. Yeah. Jesus came, he did these things, and so they are written in the most perfect piece of literature ever presented. Where we get to make them emotional is to put the camera on the shoulder of those characters who would have been impacted by the events.
Right.
So those events happened exactly as they're written, and then we get to view them through the lens of people that we can relate to. And so it's very much what you said about the characters that we know were present historically, but that we don't know too much about in terms of how they got from A to B. And in the space in between becomes an opportunity for us to get down there with them. Our task for the last 6 years has been to go into the Bible, to imagine these stories with context, with geopolitical stakes,
Right.
to imagine what it might have been physically, how taxing it may have been to follow Jesus. And when we get down at that level, we find that these are very likely characters who had vulnerabilities and desires just like we do. And so as long as we are hitting those tent poles that hold their stories up, Matthew was a tax collector. We knew that he would have been reviled by his community. We knew that he would have had a certain gift for numbers. We knew that his gospel is very fastidious in terms of its genealogies and facts. Who could this person have been? And we sort of, then extrapolate that person, it's plausible he may have been on the spectrum.
Right.
He may have had some neurodivergence. He may have not reacted as strongly as some to the social exiling.
And that's maybe, I guess what I get excited about that idea as the role of the Christian artist is to use that imagination, right? To try to help us get closer to that story by saying, here's some more facets of what these people that might have been part of what made them up, right? And so that we can appreciate them more like the people that are around us in our everyday life instead of statues up on a pedestal, right?
Yes, that's right. As our partner Dallas is fond of saying that, we take them down from the stained glass.
Yeah.
And, make them blink. We give them a sense of humor in some cases, because that's also what living with the Word gives us, is this sense that Jesus isn't static at all, is dynamic and understands us and moves through us. And his experience as fully man couldn't have been too dissimilar.
So I'm thinking of Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ. It's a much more somber, serious kind of retelling of Jesus, well, the Passion, particularly the road to the crucifixion and the resurrection. One of the things I really liked about that movie, though, was this kind of flashback scene where Jesus and his mother are goofing around and kind of chasing each other around a table. It's a kind of a humorous, teasing scene that shows the kind of humanity and the familial relationship that they had. It really highlights the human side of them, as opposed to the bits that are theologically important. Do you get some satisfaction from humanizing those characters from the gospel narrative?
Yeah, it's definitely satisfying to kind of steer away from the very overly serious portrayals that have been out there. And, there's plenty of the kind of, somber Jesus in art. And there's less of, as you said, that was just a morsel of a scene from an otherwise very heavy piece of art. And our show is a lot longer, so we have a lot more space.
Yeah.
We have 7 seasons and just hundreds of hours to play with. Do we have hundreds? Or I'm not math.
56. Yeah.
Sorry, we have 56 hours rather than 2. So there's time to kind of look at these other aspects, and of course it's rewarding because people see themselves more readily in those portrayals than in Mr. High and Mighty in a white robe, issuing decrees and teachings and doing miracles. There's something distant about that's hard to relate to. But when he's in episode 3, when he's like bending down to the creek to brush his teeth because he has a body and he needs to clean himself, that people are like, well, that's me.
Yeah, we can identify with that and understand that more. Mm-hmm. And
Did you ever have to sort of take your imagination and then rein yourself back in and say, there's a line here and we want to restrain our imagination in this particular way because we don't want people to feel like we're drifting from the scriptural narrative that we're basing all of this on?
In this season, we explore a moment where Jesus is dreaming. And, I called Tyler in a cold sweat and said, "Can I do this?
Right.
Can we do this?" And we just, and I wanted the guidance of my partners, and we of course wanted then to share with our biblical consultants and our theological advisors, and pray on it ourselves. But we wanted to share something cinematically that presented as a dream.
Yeah.
And what its true purpose is to try to give the audience some sense of the breadth of Jesus' concerns as minister to a flock. And so we can't possibly understand the creator of the universe's mind, and we would never suggest otherwise. And our stories will never have the impact or authority of the Bible. But we believe that the Bible is so perfectly presented that it can handle it.
Yeah.
It can handle it if we are sarcastic in a moment. If we point you back to the story and say, and it proves us wrong, great. We're happy to have gotten you back into your Bibles.
Okay.
And we will always give way to what the Bible says.
Yeah.
In this moment, our intention was loving our characters. We love them all. And we are certainly in awe of even a loving fan's portrayal of who Jesus might have been. Mm-hmm. So the idea that we would go and create for him a dream felt like we were touching the edge.
Okay.
So that was a moment where we found the edge. Yeah. And we tried very hard to rein ourselves in from anything. And we have to remember, Proverbs 3:5 every time we sit down and rely not on our own understanding.
Right.
And just go, what does the page say? Because I can otherwise bring my own preconceptions and assumptions into what I've heard this as before. But what it says on the page is what goes on screen, and everything else in the middle is inserted. We try to make it in service of those words.
So tell me about the writing cooperatives, how you write cooperatively then. So you're having this idea to write about the dream. You're calling up Tyler. You're saying, can we do this? Does this work? Like, does one of you draft a script for an episode and then the other one come in as, editor, and then you take turns? Or are you brainstorming together?
We all do all of it, but we do end up on an assembly line.
Yeah.
And we've done that since season 1. We the three of us get together and figure out where we start, where we end, and then sorry, I jumped in on the second one there, but yeah, we each take turns figuring out what the episodes are going to be, and then
you chop it up into like beats or something, and like, okay, Tyler, you do this, but and then not so much.
No, we agree on an outline together.
Okay,
all three of us, and then there'll be a first draft and a second draft, and then a final draft. So it's just an assembly line after we together agree on the outline. But there are beats within the outline. We just don't divvy them up.
So, and I think you mentioned the consultants that you have, and I was reading a bit about that in advance. So you got like 4 consultants, like a New Testament prof and a Messianic Christian, and recently you took on board a Jewish religious scholar of some kind.
We have we've always had a Messianic rabbi. We recently retained some Israeli historians and scholars overseas, and then we have global consultants as well in the global South, Asia, and Africa.
Oh, okay. So I was going to ask, like, where do they come in? That is that again at the editing level, like you've dreamed up something and then you want to kind of run it by them and say, hey, do you think this passes muster, or is there some involvement at the early stages, or is it just a question of when you come up with something and you want to say, I wonder if that's legit to first century Palestine or whatever? Should I ask somebody about a detail or whatever? I'm just wondering how the consultants feed into your work, I guess.
The scripts are usually done by the time they get involved. So we have gotten to a final draft, and then they all go in a batch over to the biblical consultants.
Oh, okay.
And they more flag things per their area of expertise.
Yep.
So our Messianic rabbi Jason is going to like flag things that maybe first century Jewish culture, tradition, holidays, prayers, that he's going to like identify, even names. Sometimes a name you'll be like, oh, this is more of like a, 14th century medieval name.
Oh, okay.
Just
Yep.
minutia,
Yeah.
And then, our Catholic priest who looks at it is going to maybe identify some things within the Catholic tradition that might stand out one way or another. Same with our evangelical historian. But you mentioned like, oh, is this, checking on something that's maybe more in the minutia. Along the way, we do have researchers, Gabrielle Litweiler, and then also we have Mike Gosselin, who's like stepping in to implement that research. So we do have people that we're going to in the moment, but it's not the big consultants that kind of identify things just before we go to print, so to speak. Like they will just point things out and come back with their report, and then we pour over their findings and decide which things merit, a second look, and which things it's like, oh, things good to know. Yeah, we're probably going to keep it as is, or do a slight, change a name, or switch up a prayer or something like that.
Huh. Okay, cool. Well, it sounds like you've got a real big team then. That yes, there's the two of you writers, and there's Dallas. So there's the three of you, and then it goes. It's a real team effort. Then, when you see the final production, does it feel like there's a distance between that and sitting in that over your coffees and coming up with the break? Like, how does that feel to you?
That's a good question. We certainly, in the collaborative medium of film, have many collaborators, and on a given day we might have 150 people on set who are all sort of in their milieu or departments, who are pulling, and we hope, in the same direction. But everybody's interpreting the script from our actors to our lighting crew, and so there is a big opportunity for it to alter. But we, our experience on The Chosen, and I think it's kind of singular among productions, is that it's almost always consistently plussed. We're finding somebody has taken it and run with it.
Right.
I always love coming to set and seeing the things that James Cunningham has built. It's like having a dream, and you woke up and you're in it, and it's better than you had imagined. Awesome. More detailed and things like that. So that part of the process, it's encouraging. I don't think it creates distance so much as it makes it feel like we've communicated something and passed it along truly. And Dallas being part of our writing team and also part of the final product is make sure it doesn't get too far away from anything that we had intended in the beginning.
Yeah, I can see that. That's a great continuity thing for you then. So that must be very. I can only imagine that that's super gratifying to create that ground level document of this is what we're going to do, and then have all these people take off, and it just flies, right? And it adds color and it adds detail and all of that. Do you go home and say, do you rewatch the episodes a lot and say, oh, that? Or are you like, no, I've been in this so many times, I'm kind of like, I don't want to watch it repeatedly anymore?
I don't really rewatch. Sometimes when in the right to go back and reference even just like an article of clothing or something, like there'll be just little things. Yeah. And we can go digging through the old scripts to be like, what exactly was the exact quote? Just make sure there's continuity. But it's often faster to just jump into the episode and scrub around and find the scene we're looking for and make sure we're not contradicting ourselves, because it does. He mentioned a dream. It does feel like a dream we had a long time ago, and then we're always dreaming forward, and to go back would be really odd. At some point, I probably should revisit it all. But you know how it is. You're a creative person yourself. We've all grown year over year. Yeah. So I think it might be challenging for me to go back, because even when I do go back and look at some clips, I'm like, oh, I could have taken that up, or like, or oh, I wish we would have maybe done that a little bit differently. But ultimately, no regrets. I just, very self-critical. So I'm like, forward, don't look back.
What about you, Ryan? Do you rewatch episodes?
I do. One of the interesting things about the way The Chosen has sort of unfolded is it's on various platforms now. And so when the CW, a broadcaster in the United States, picked it up, and it began this summer. We were shooting in Utah at that time, and so it was fun to go back to the hotel and turn it on and watch episode 1, unfurling 4+ years after it had initially debuted. And so to see it again, or to have somebody call and say, hey, I saw season 2 or episode 2 of your show, it sort of throws you back into that space. And yeah, we have episodes that we remember fondly for different reasons. And so, yeah, like Tyler said, we have to go back and watch them for continuity. I don't go back and sort of relive those moments or pick up on the small nuggets often enough. I think there's maybe a day in my future.
I was gonna say there'll be time for that, right?
There'll be time for that.
Yeah, it's a seven season arc that we're aiming for, right? And then maybe some spin-offs of various kinds.
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe. Yeah.
Okay. Let me. There's another question I wanted to ask you about Jesus, particularly on film. So Jesus is fully human and fully God. And there's a bit of a challenge for that, I think. And so I'm just wondering about how you kind of think about that. So I don't know. Can you just give me some feedback on how you think about Jesus's humanity versus his being God?
Hypostatic union, fully God, fully man. I don't think there's anything such thing as too human if Jesus was fully human and fully man. I maybe I hear what you're saying, where people might get tripped up by seeing him have human limitations, but that's what the show is kind of designed to do, is to, upend maybe some of these traditional notions that people have of this like lofty, untouchable figure, and bring it down into this reality where, he's thinking of his audience when he's preparing the Sermon on the Mount and wanting to make sure that it really lands. He's kind of consulting with Matthew. What would be a good opener? I'm looking for the right opener, and instead of like this person who just opened their mouth and divine revelation came out, which is probably true in some way, but we're very interested in the relatable like humanness of Jesus. And so the doctrine of the hypostatic union frees us from any, concern about, oh, is this too human or is this too divine? Because you can't have too much of anything that is fully both, which I recognize also for human minds can be kind of a lot to grasp. Like, how can someone be fully a duality? How can they be fully these two binary things, or whatever? But that's the mystery of Christ, and that's the business that we're in. Is exploring this mystery, not solving it, not distilling it down into something that's like too digestible. The fact that there sometimes is discourse around the show, noise around the show about like, oh, I don't know if Jesus would have done that, is if anything an encouragement to me, because it means we're doing something right. Yeah. If people are startled, that's what I want from art, is to be startled and become curious and perhaps overwhelmed.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that, practicing for the Sermon on the Mount thing, and then I read something that some people had felt uncomfortable about that. That Jesus would have to practice to get something right or whatever. Like, didn't just. So yeah, I think. Do you interact with people that have those concerns at all? Like, I think you probably just explained right there that this is the mystery. Is that kind of what would you say to those people that are feeling uncomfortable? Could you give them some thoughts about how to work through that?
Well,
I mean, maybe that's not your job.
Yeah, there's a really engage critics.
Okay.
We just do the work.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you as a sort of detached, only from a detached place, that like, I understand, and if we were so full of ourselves to think that we were never going to get anything wrong, we would never have started.
Okay.
I mean, we really wouldn't have ever started. We had to start with this idea that at once we're using the most widely read book of all time. And so it's a recipe for disaster. Yeah, we can never match anything that you've imagined in your mind all your life. Yeah. 2, nobody's probably ever going to see this. so we held both ideas in our minds at the same time. And we went, okay, if no one's ever going to see this, let's just go for it. On the other hand, everybody has seen it. Everybody's read it. Everybody has their ideas about what this show should be, or what the movie version of the book I've read all my life is. What we want to do is we want to go into those stories that you think you know so well and say, what if it was told this way? Not from the Good Samaritan's perspective, but from the Bad Samaritan's perspective. Would you recognize it as your own? Could you take ownership of it once you did? And so if it just forces you back to what you already knew, that's fine too, because this is the greatest story ever told, and it has broad shoulders. It can take it, is what we believe.
Yeah.
And so if we're thinking, if you're upset about how we portray Jesus, just know that we're fallible, but that we love him too.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a trust there, I guess, right? That you're building with your audience. Like you're kind of saying, let's imagine this together. And you can trust me that I'm not gonna imagine things that are gonna be contrary to Scripture. I'm not gonna let my imagination go into something that would be disrespectful in a sense, right? So, and I think from what I've seen, you have managed to do that, right? Your audience does trust you, and they're excited for season 4 coming out. They're excited. They're wanting to be there for the whole shebang.
Yeah.
So I guess kudos to you in that respect, that you're obviously managing to do that.
Well, and those
Sounds like a tough job.
And those who don't aren't, right? Those who we've lost won't.
Yeah.
And they have the Bible.
Yep, they do.
Yeah.
They do. And the other artwork, there may be some other artistic portrayal that is more suited to them, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Right. Okay, well that's most of what I wanted to talk to you about. Is there anything that you would want to add that I didn't ask you about in this? Did I make you think of something that you think I wish you...
No, I mean, we're just excited for season 4 to come out. We're excited for people to see it in the theater. It's a great experience. Just being with other fans and laughing together, crying together. It's a communal experience. So I hope that people go.
So it's coming out in like multiple blocks, right? So like people can go to a theater and they can see episodes like 1 to 3 or something, and then a couple weeks later they can go to the theater and see some more, right? That's how it goes.
Yeah, every 2 weeks. Yeah,
that's right.
Well, sign me up.
Totally. You enjoy.
Okay. Thanks so much for coming and being with us today. And we'll hopefully, if we hear from some of our viewers about it, we can pass on their feedback to you as well.
Thanks, Bill.
Cool.
Okay. Appreciate it.
Cheers.